Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Azzad Asset Management's presentation on making fixed income socially responsible. Very quickly, a couple of housekeeping items. We're going to make sure that everybody is able to hear us. So I'm going to unmute all the participants at this point, and if one brave soul could jump in and say that we are coming through loud and clear, that would be appreciated. 1 second. So can everybody hear us okay? Just need one yay or nay. Alrighty, I think we're good. And hopefully you can see our home screen. Is that also the case? The title slide should be Making Fixed Income Socially Responsible. Hopefully that is also the case. Yes, all right. Let me mute everybody again, and we'll get the presentation started. Okay, so what we'll do now is go ahead and kick things off. I would also point out that the presentation is being recorded, and we'll make it available for individuals shortly after its conclusion. Let's go ahead and get things started. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Azzad Asset Management's presentation on making fixed income socially responsible. We'd like to thank everyone for being here. We're here to tell you a little bit today about our version of socially responsible fixed income. As the promo materials for today's presentation say, SRI fixed income funds are few and far between, and their strategies typically involve buying and selling the debt of companies that meet SRI criteria. So the question is, can socially responsible fixed income investing be more than that? And we definitely think that it can be. So to more fully answer that question, we're going to talk to you today about the Azzad Wise Capital Fund and its approach to SRI fixed income investing. One that avoids interest-based transactions, avoids investing in harmful activities, and supports high-impact investing in communities around the world. So with that, let's go ahead and get things started. Here's a look at the agenda for today. We'll spend the bulk of our time on the third and fourth bullet points, most probably, which deal with participation banks and the impact they're having on indigenous communities globally. Slide 3, though, let's go ahead and take a look at introductions. However, let's do that first. On your screen now, you'll see the presenters for today. My name is Josh Brockwell. I'm the Director of Investment Communications here at Azzad. And joining me is our Vice President and Portfolio Manager for the Azzad Wise Capital Fund, Mr. Jamal Barmia. Welcome, Jamal.
Thank you, Josh.
So very quickly, a word from our sponsor, just to give you some background on our firm. We're a boutique investment advisory firm located outside Washington, D.C., registered with the SEC as an investment advisory firm, and we work with clients nationwide. In addition to serving as independent financial advisors, we manage and sponsor 2 publicly traded mutual funds, as well as model portfolios for institutional and retail clients. And our team consists of chartered financial analysts and certified financial planners. So a quick word on the Azzad Philosophy. One of the things we want to share with you today is our dual mission philosophy, and it focuses on generating competitive long-term financial returns while using investment capital to promote a sustainable economy and provide a positive social impact in accord with our ethical investing principles. Like most everybody gathered here today, our vision is a world in which investment capital helps to build a sustainable and equitable economy.
And I would say, Josh, also in addition to that, as such, all our products and investments comply with Halal investment guidelines as established by the Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions, or IOFI. We're also a member of the Forum for Sustainable and Responsible Investment.
Thank you, Jamal. All right, slide 7. Here are the 7 tenets of halal investing that we follow at Azzad Asset Management. They comply with AOFI guidance, the group that Jamal just mentioned, and they form the backbone of our methodology. And let me take a brief minute here to further explain halal investing, which is sometimes referred to as Sharia-compliant investing. Western discussions of Sharia law often focus on extreme interpretations of penal codes. But Sharia, which derives from various human interpretations of the Quran, Islam's holy book, and the religious teachings of Islam is also applied to the finance or financial sector. Interestingly, the English definition of the word Sharia is the path that leads to water. In other words, it's the means by which our thirst for guidance and social justice is quenched. And as such, halal investing can be seen as part of a wider movement towards the promotion of sustainability as a key element of economic life. Joel?
Yes, exactly, Josh. And remember, the basic premise here of halal investing is that no one should profit purely from money. This leads to a shift away from the short-term transaction and towards a longer-term equity-based relationship. We do this primarily in three ways. Number one, we avoid investing in harmful activities. Two, we use the principle of risk and equity sharing. And three, we support high-impact investing in indigenous communities. So in keeping with our ethical principles, we pay close attention to both the means and to the ends. We go beyond the purpose of financing and also cover its structure. This is because of the Islamic prohibition on interest and the trading of risk. Today, we will get to some of the products that incorporate that philosophy.
Thanks, Jamal. So with that, why don't we take a look at how we put these principles into practice with the Azzad Capital Fund?
Thanks, Josh. Let me give you a little information on the fund. It seeks to preserve capital and provide fixed income. It's categorized as a short-term bond fund. And simply put, our mission is to connect investors with people in need of capital in a responsible way. This is done in hopes of helping both sides profit from a mutually beneficial transaction in which all parties have a stake in the outcome of a particular business venture. It's sometimes called the double bottom line. We will talk more about this when we get to participation banking in a few minutes. Okay, here is the performance of the fund allocation as of September 30th of this year. I'll give you a minute to look at it. And the next slide, please. And here is the performance data quoted here can be checked actually online through data providers as Morningstar, Lipper, Yahoo Finance, and the like.
So let's talk about one of the big alternative asset classes that the Azzad Capital Fund invests in, which is Sukuk.
Okay. So IOFI, the accounting and auditing organization for Islamic financial institutions, defines Sukuk as shown here. I'll give you a minute to look at it. Next slide, please. Sukuk are often considered the Islamic alternative to both to bonds because they do not represent an interest-based transaction. Lending with interest is not permissible in Islam. Fixed income products and access to capital are still important parts of a corporate or sovereign capital structure, however. So Sukuk were created as a solution. They are either asset-based or backed and offer a cash flow behavior similar to bonds, though not guaranteed.
I would also add that Sukuk demand is broadly driven by two major investment groups. That's what we've seen here at Azzad. And the two groups are Islamic investors who are interested in our particular philosophy, and other investors looking for opportunities to gain access to Sukuk credits for simple exposure to emerging markets and yield. The outstanding global Sukuk market, just to give you an idea of scope, is over $250 billion. That's globally, and there are a couple U.S. institutions like Fidelity and PIMCO investing roughly $30 billion.
Yes. And because the payments on Sukuk are generated from the underlying asset or venture can be structured in a way that is similar to the interest and principal payments on a conventional bond, traditional fixed income investors will find Sukuk familiar from a cash flow perspective. This covers both the form and function of ethical fixed income. In other words, the means and the ends that we talked about earlier.
Also, I'll say that Sukuk can be considered more appropriate, according to some definitions, for SRI investors than conventional bonds because they provide investors with a high degree of certainty that their money will be used for a specific purpose. In order to comply with our ethical standards, the funds raised through the issue of Sukuk must be applied to investment in identifiable assets or ventures. Therefore, if Sukuk are structured to provide funds to a specified development project that's appealing to SRI investors, such as a renewable energy project or housing program, there's little chance that investors' money will be diverted and used for another purpose. Also, one more thing about Sukuk. This next slide shows it well. It explains how the Dow Jones Sukuk Index, which we use as an internal benchmark for the Sukuk component of the Azzad Capital Fund, diverges a bit from conventional bond indices. The correlation percentage is a measure of the degree of linear relationship between the index on the x-axis and the Dow Jones Sukuk Index. At a correlation of 100%, which would be all the way to the top of that chart, the indices shown here would move in lockstep with the Dow Jones Sukuk Index, but that's not what we see. Instead, we see that in some instances, there's only a weak relationship between the Dow Jones Sukuk Index and the indices plotted here. The implication being that Sukuk do have characteristics consistent with asset classes deemed to be alternatives. And this, of course, is important from an asset allocation standpoint, since investors often look for asset classes that don't always perform the same way.
Yeah, and let's turn to a popular component of the WISE Capital Fund, participation banks. We feel that participation banks are a major source of untapped potential in SRI investing. In participation banking, an organization enters into a partnership with its depositors and invests their money in a permissible line of business. The profit or loss from this investment is shared among all parties involved. This includes the depositor, the bank, and the entrepreneur. Participation banking bundles account holders' assets and channels that capital to productive ventures in society. Because all parties in a transaction explicitly share both risk and reward, the argument has been made that participation banking is, in fact, more sustainable than its Western counterpart. And of course, questions still remain over whether the conventional banks pushed to the brink during the recent financial crisis have actually changed their way and become more responsible. In light of this, the continued growth of participation banking demonstrates the growing acceptance of alternative approaches in the market.
Okay, thanks, Jamal. And the next slide, actually keep going.
Exactly. And here's a diagram showing how investment account holders make a return by investing in real economic projects. With participation bank deposits, when you put your money with a bank, you are investing in the primary market. Money is having a real impact on the economy. For example, infrastructure projects and microfinance are two ways participation banks use your money. I want to take a moment here to emphasize that the entrepreneur in these projects is not charged interest in the case of delinquency, nor, of course, would there be any compounding of interest, which can lead to deeper and deeper debt.
Very important point. Thank you, Jamal.
Thank you.
So now let's turn our attention to the practical application of participation banking in Indonesia. And Indonesia, we think, is an up-and-coming market for participation banking, and it represents enormous potential for social good. Yeah.
And this country, Josh, offers some of the most compelling evidence for the viability of participation banking. Through projects like microfinance, investors are participating in local business to support indigenous communities in need of development. For example, here's a slide showing how one local community is using participation banking funds to finance a community paper-making business. And here's another example of how participation banking funds are being used to finance a business that converts animal waste into fertilizer.
I'll also point out that if you don't believe us, you can just talk to Jamal, who just recently over the summer got back from a trip to Indonesia where he saw a lot of this firsthand. So it's a great resource if any of you are interested after the webcast. Very quickly moving on, biogas is another project funded through participation banking. This slide shows how participation banks are helping a local farming community to recycle animal waste into cooking fuel.
Exactly. In addition to what Josh has said, actually, this slide encapsulates many of our principles. Number one, not harming the environment by using a more eco-friendly fuel. And number two, improving the quality of life for local populations. And number three, using microfinance and risk-sharing techniques to do this.
Yeah, that's a pretty stunning before and after there at the bottom of that slide, sort of showing the life of an average Indonesian. Looks like a housewife preparing a meal for the family. Clearly unsafe conditions there to the left of the arrow, but the after is a much nicer picture.
Yes.
Thanks to that biogas and that eco-friendly project. So finally, let me take a second here to talk about mangroves. Some of you may know we've already lost over half of the world's original mangrove forest area, which is estimated at around 80 million acres lost. Less than 37 million acres of mangroves remain. And Indonesia, believe it or not, is home to over a quarter of the world's mangrove population. Here we see sustainable coastal fishing practices on the Indonesian island of Java. Fishermen use participation banking funds to plant mangroves, which shelter various populations of fish. One of the ways that participation banks help indigenous populations and the environment is to incentivize this type of sustainable aquaculture. And I will also point out that on your screen right now is some important information about the Azzad Capital Fund. Our good friends in compliance request that you read it. Give you a second. It'll also be available after the presentation upon request. So there you have it. This brings us to the end of today's webcast. I'll quickly point out that through the Azzad Capital Fund, shareholders can invest in these sorts of worthwhile opportunities, all while promoting impact investing in communities all over the world. We think it's a novel way of making fixed income socially responsible. And with that, we'll open up the presentation to questions for the remaining time. We obviously finished quite early. If there are any questions, we'll take those now. And if not, we will conclude in order to be mindful of everyone's time. Thanks again, everybody, for participating. As I mentioned, the webcast will be available online in the next couple days after we get it rendered and posted. Thanks for your time. Thanks, Jamal, for your participation.
Thanks, Josh.
Have a great day, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.